Hello there. I'm so happy you're here with me tonight. Insomnia keeping you company? Well, now you have me too. Let's make these sleepless hours meaningful with some hushed stories, authentic experiences from real people everywhere. If you find yourself drawn to these tales, please like, comment, and subscribe so we can meet again tomorrow night. Now, let me take you away with our first story.
In the gentle hills of southern Ohio, nestled approximately 70 miles east of Cincinnati, sits the village of Piketon. It is a small community of around 2,000 residents, characterized by its rural landscape with rugged terrain, filled with farms and considerable distances between properties. Piketon embodies the essence of small-town America, where neighbors know one another, fostering a strong sense of community spirit. However, in April of 2016, this tranquil village would become associated with Ohio's largest mass murder case and one of the most complex investigations in the state's history. Our story begins on a quiet Friday morning, April 22nd, 2016. The time was 7:49 a.m. when a call was received by emergency services. The caller was Bobby Jo Manley, who had been following her regular morning routine. Each day, Bobby would visit her brother-in-law's trailer to assist with feeding the dogs and chickens. Her brother-in-law was Christopher Roden Sr., who had recently separated from Bobby's sister, Dana. Though this separation had not affected Bobby's daily visits to help with the animals, on this particular morning, however, Bobby noticed something unusual as she arrived at Christopher's property. The dogs, which normally would be inside the trailer, were outside. When she approached the door, she found it locked, which was peculiar, as Christopher typically left it open for her early morning visits. Somewhat confused, Bobby used her spare key to enter the trailer. Inside, an unsettling silence greeted her. As she moved further into the home, she observed a trail of blood on the floor, appearing as though something had been dragged across it. Following this disturbing trail, Bobby discovered the bodies of her brother-in-law, Christopher Roden Sr., and his cousin, Gary Roden, in one of the bedrooms. With trembling hands, Bobby contacted emergency services. After ending the call, she hurried to check on one of Dana and Christopher's sons, Clarence, who went by the name Frankie. Frankie lived in a trailer just a short distance away with his fiancée Hannah Gilly and their 6-month-old son Ruger. Frankie's 3-year-old son from a previous relationship, Brentley, also frequently stayed with them. Upon arriving at Frankie's trailer, Bobby was met at the door by 3-year-old Brentley. The child appeared confused and told Bobby that his father looked like he had turned into a zombie. Brentley explained that he had tried to wake his father by grabbing his hand, but it had simply fallen limply to his side. Bobby entered the trailer and found Frankie and Hannah both deceased in their bed with blood soaking the sheets and floor. Next to them was their 6-month-old son, Ruger. Patting his father's chest, the infant was covered in blood, but remarkably was physically unharmed. Bobby, understandably distraught, was joined by her brother James, who went to check on their sister. Dana's trailer, also located on the same property, just a short walk away. Inside Dana's home, James found their sister, who was 37 years old, also deceased. He then discovered the bodies of Dana and Christopher, Sr.'s 2 children, 19-year-old Hannah Roden and 16-year-old Christopher Jr. All had been in their beds, and all had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Hannah had been in her bed with her 4-day-old daughter Kylie, who, like the other children, was alive and physically unharmed. In a span of minutes, 7 members of the Roden family had been found deceased, leaving 4 children without their parents. As authorities hastened to the scene, local news crews quickly arrived at the trailers. However, the tragedy was not yet fully uncovered. Later that day, another call would come in from several miles away. Donald Stone, upon hearing the news about the Roden family, decided to check on his cousin, Kenneth Roden, who was Christopher Sr.'s brother. Kenneth lived on Left Fork Road, a few miles from where the other family members had been found. Sadly, the 44-year-old Kenneth was also discovered deceased, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Curiously, Kenneth was surrounded by cash when he was found. By the end of that day, a total of 8 bodies had been discovered across 4 separate locations. All victims had been shot some as many as 9 times. The deceased were 40-year-old Christopher Roden Sr., his former wife, 37-year-old Dana Manley Roden, their 3 children, 19-year-old Hannah Roden, 16-year-old Christopher Jr., and 20-year-old Frankie Roden, 20-year-old Hannah Gilly, who was Frankie's fiancée, 38-year-old Gary Roden, who was Christopher Sr.'s cousin, and 44-year-old Kenneth Roden, Christopher Sr.'s brother. The 3 young children, 4-day-old Kylie, 6-month-old Ruger, and 3-year-old Brentley, were all removed from the scene and placed in temporary protective custody. Hannah Roden also had another daughter, almost 3-year-old Sophia, who had not been at the house that day, having been with her father Jake. She too was unharmed. The entire community knew the Roden family well, as they were prominent members of the local area. Christopher Sr. was born and raised in Ohio, having spent most of his life working in construction. He was recognized for being hardworking, dependable, and family-oriented. Despite their separation, he and his former wife Dana had maintained an amicable relationship. Dana worked as a nursing assistant and enjoyed gardening and baking. She was an active member of her local church. 20-year-old Frankie had followed in his father's footsteps, studying welding. He had been looking forward to marrying Hannah Gilly and advancing in his career while being a devoted father to his 2 young sons. Hannah Gilly expressed that her greatest joy was being a mother and had dreams of having a large, bustling family. The youngest victim, Christopher Jr., was known for his sense of humor and his talent as a performer, singing baritone in his choir. His sister Hannah Roden worked as a nursing assistant like her mother, but had a particular passion for photography. She was described as having a loud, feisty personality with a strong character. Kenneth Roden, like his brother Christopher Sr., was dedicated to his work, commuting an hour each way to his job in Columbus, Ohio. Though he disliked being away from his family for extended periods, Gary Roden was remembered as a quiet but exceptionally kind and helpful person, someone who would be there for others regardless of the time of day or night. As news of the tragedy spread, it soon reached international attention. The investigation at each scene continued as authorities tried to determine what might have motivated such a mass murder. Based on the evidence at the crime scenes, it appeared that all victims had been killed during the night. Christopher Sr. and Gary seemed to have been the first victims shot around midnight. The manner of the killing suggested a methodical approach, almost like an execution. It had clearly been carefully planned and thought through. 3-year-old Brentley could provide no information to the police. He had been asleep in the front room and neither saw nor heard anything. No one else reported seeing or hearing anything unusual either. No vehicles were known to have passed by at the time, and there were no nearby neighbors apart from the family members themselves. Although there were 4 separate crime scenes, they were all in close proximity to one another, with 3 of them being less than a few minutes' walk apart. Police moved all the trailers to a warehouse where they could be monitored around the clock. They also seized and searched dozens of vehicles found on the property. An early finding in the investigation was the discovery of marijuana growing operations at 3 of the 4 crime scenes, with one location containing as many as 2,000 cannabis plants. This initially led investigators to suspect potential involvement of a Mexican drug cartel, particularly given that Kenneth, who was growing plants outside, was found surrounded by a significant amount of cash, suggesting the crime scene might have been staged as some sort of message. Detectives believed there was more than one shooter involved, as 3 different types of shell casings had been found, along with different sized shoe prints and treads. However, the theory involving a cartel was soon questioned. The killers would have needed to be familiar with the properties, knowing the layouts and the routines of the family members very well. It also seemed unusual that the dogs did not react. People unfamiliar to them, arriving in the middle of the night, would likely have caused a disturbance. This suggested the possibility that the killers had used silencers on their weapons. Despite the natural concerns of the public about their own safety, the police were fairly certain that this was a targeted attack. They did not believe anyone else in the community was in danger. Between April 26th and May 3rd, all 8 victims were laid to rest, with hundreds attending their funerals. Meanwhile, the authorities continued their difficult investigation. By November 2016, 7 months had passed since the murders, which constituted Ohio's largest mass murder case. Various theories had emerged about what happened to the Rhoden family, but there were no clear answers or arrests. Sheriff Charles Reeder expressed his belief that the killers were local and that people in the community might have information they were afraid to share, either for fear of incriminating themselves or out of concern for their own safety. Over 800 tips were received and more than 400 interviews were conducted. However, as time passed, the department recognized the need for additional resources. The case was unprecedented for their area and too extensive for a small team to handle alone. By April 2017, a year had passed since the murders, with no significant progress or answers. Petitions began circulating, with residents hoping to involve the FBI. While the public was concerned about the pace of the investigation, investigators were carefully balancing the sharing of information with the need to protect certain details. They knew that whoever the killers were, they would be monitoring all public statements about the case, and the authorities needed to stay one step ahead. At this point, detectives had executed dozens of search warrants. One day, they searched the grounds of a 27-acre farm in Peebles, Ohio, following tips suggesting it was an area of interest. The farm had been sold a couple of months earlier, but had previously belonged to Edward Wagner, known as Jake. Jake was the father of Sophia and the former boyfriend of Hannah Rhoden. The connection between the Wagner family and the Rhoden family was evident, and police had been closely observing them since learning about custody disputes between Jake and Hannah regarding their daughter, Sophia. Investigators found it noteworthy that Sophia had not been at any of the homes on the day of the shootings, and wondered if this was merely coincidental or suggested a premeditated plan. Although investigators had not publicly named anyone in the Wagner family, as a person of interest, or suspect in a small town like Piketon where gossip travels quickly. Speculation inevitably arose. The Wagner family was known to be wealthy and influential with everyone in the area. Familiar with their name, Jake's grandmother Frederica owned more than 1,700 acres in Pike County, with property values estimated at over $4 million, a considerable fortune for anyone, but particularly significant in that region. The Wagners were described as a very close-knit group that maintained strong internal bonds while rarely allowing outsiders into their circle. After the murders, Jake's family, his father, Billy mother, Angela, and older brother George relocated approximately 4,000 miles away to Alaska, taking Sophia with them. They stated that the move was necessary due to death threats and persistent false rumors being spread about them. As 2018 drew to a close, after what had appeared to be a quiet year for the case, detectives announced they had made 6 arrests in connection with the Roden family murders. 48-year-old Angela Wagner, her husband, 47-year-old George Wagner III, known as Billy, and their 2 sons, 27-year-old George Wagner IV and 26-year-old Jake Wagner, were all arrested and charged with murder, along with 20 other charges. Additionally, 65-year-old Rita Newcomb Angela's mother and 76-year-old Frederica Billy's mother were arrested on accusations of covering up the murders. Since learning about the custody issues involving Sophia, the police had gathered enough evidence to suggest that the plan to kill the Roden family had been developing for some time. Jake had met Hannah when she was just 13 years old and began a relationship with her when he was nearly 20. By most accounts, Hannah was infatuated with Jake, even moving in with the Wagner family. They got matching tattoos on their ring fingers and told everyone they were essentially married. By the time Hannah was 15, she was pregnant with Sophia. During the pregnancy, Jake became fixated on the idea of custody, wanting Sophia entirely to himself, even though he and Hannah were still together. At that point, after Sophia's birth, Jake began controlling various aspects of Hannah's life, including her diet, her movements, and her social interactions. Eventually, his obsessive behavior became too much for Hannah, and they separated, with Hannah moving back to her mother Dana's home due to their shared child tension and disputes between Jake and Hannah. And by extension, their families became constant. Jake went as far as recording their conversations, hoping to catch Hannah saying something that would allow him to gain full custody of Sophia. This tactic never succeeded. When Jake discovered that Hannah was pregnant with her second child, Kylie, despite the baby not being his, he demanded that Hannah put his surname on Kylie's birth certificate. Kylie's biological father was already known to the Roden family. He was Charlie Gilley, the brother of Hannah Gilley, who was engaged to Frankie. Jake became furious when Hannah refused his demand and then attempted to obtain mandatory visitation rights, arguing that since Kylie was Sophia's sister, he was essentially Kylie's father as well. Even after DNA testing confirmed that Kylie was not his child, Jake continued to insist that Hannah was being untruthful and began making allegations that Hannah's boyfriend had sexually abused Sophia. Allegations that were determined to be unfounded. Just a few weeks before the murders, Jake presented Hannah with custody documents that had supposedly been signed by various parties. These documents were later discovered to have been forged by his mother, Angela. Hannah recognized the forgery, refused to sign anything, and made it clear that she would never agree to Jake having full custody of Sophia. Hannah had even posted on Facebook, using her mother's account to publicly declare her position, stating that she would never sign such papers and that they would have to kill her first. A statement that would prove tragically prophetic. The exact motivation remains uncertain. But Billy, Angela, George, and Jake developed an elaborate plan to eliminate the family. They studied the family's habits, routines, work patterns, and even when the dogs were walked. They also examined the security cameras on the properties which had been tampered with prior to the murders. Further searches of various homes and vehicles revealed shell casings matching those found at the murder scenes, as well as shoes that corresponded in size and tread pattern to those identified at the crime scenes. Investigators were able to trace the purchase of the shoes to Angela, who had bought them at a Walmart just one day before the killings. During another search, police discovered components for making gun silencers, along with 20 bags of concrete mix. The Wagners had used this concrete to bury some of the weapons before hiding them in a goose house by a lake. Investigators also found what appeared to be a $630 cell phone jammer, presumably intended to prevent the family from calling for help. Analysis of the Wagners' bank accounts showed that their income came from sources beyond farming. Authorities likened their operations to those of high-level criminal organizations, noting that they had a history of burning down their own properties and vehicles to fraudulently claim insurance money. A disturbing portrait emerged of a formidable family. The Wagners were, according to various accounts, not a family to cross, and a formidable adversary if one did. Their loyalty to each other was strong, with every decision, significant or trivial, made collectively. Angela was described as the matriarch, willing to go to any lengths to protect her sons, Jake and George. During their time in Alaska, Jake had married a woman named Beth Ann. She later stated that she feared for her life when she fled from her brief and tumultuous marriage. To him, Beth Ann had made it clear from the beginning that she wanted to wait before becoming intimate, but according to her, Jake and his family rushed the marriage and ensured that they consummated the relationship on their wedding night. Beth Ann described an unusually close relationship between Angela and her sons, particularly Jake. She recalled that when she first met Jake, she initially thought he and Angela were a couple, both Beth Ann and George's former wife. Tabitha described the Wagners as having a pack-like mentality, with Angela clearly in charge. They maintained an isolated and insular lifestyle and would similarly isolate anyone new who joined their family, separating them from their own family and friends. Tabitha noted that she observed the same pattern of behavior when the 13-year-old Hannah began spending time with Jake, causing her immediate concern for Hannah and Sophia's well-being. Tabitha had married George shortly after high school and was also isolated from her family and prevented from leaving the Wagner home. According to Tabitha, Angela even dictated what George and Tabitha could do in their private, intimate life, claiming certain activities would lead to damnation. After Tabitha and George had their son, Borvin, Tabitha tried to convince George to move out, but he refused. She decided to end the relationship after George began physically abusing her with a belt, and Angela attacked her with a piece of wood, threatening to shoot her. As soon as she could, Tabitha escaped on her bicycle to a gas station where she called her mother for assistance. Angela began making baseless accusations against both Beth Ann and Tabitha, including allegations that Beth Ann had inappropriately touched Sophia and attempted to poison the children. After the separation, George retained custody of Borvin and prevented Tabitha from having contact with their son for a year. Eventually, they agreed to shared custody, but George rarely complied with the arrangement and did not inform Tabitha when his family relocated to Alaska, taking Borvin with them along with Sophia. Jake believed his mother's accusations without question. He told Beth Ann that he would hang her in the barn, beat her with a bat, and then burn the barn down. He added that if he didn't do it himself, his parents would have no hesitation in completing the task. Beth Ann recounted that on the day she left, she changed her clothes inside. A Walmart slipped out through a back section without any possessions and met a friend who drove her out of the state. With this evidence and the clear motive of the obsession with custody of both Sophia and Borvin, combined with the discovery of the murder weapons, the shoes, and the receipts, investigators had compiled a compelling case. The timeline of events was reconstructed as follows. Sophia was not originally scheduled to be with Jake and his family on the day of the murders. It had been an impromptu arrangement. Hannah, exhausted from caring for her 4-day-old baby, had accepted Jake's offer to take Sophia for the day. The Wagners had already prepared silencers, purchased new shoes, and thoroughly studied the routines of all family members. Sometime after 10 p.m., Billy George and Jake left their home while Angela remained behind with the grandchildren. The three men first went to Christopher Sr.'s trailer, where they shot him and his cousin Gary. They then quickly proceeded to the second trailer next door, where they killed Frankie and Hannah Gilly before moving just down the path to Dana's trailer, where they shot Dana, Hannah Roden, and Christopher Roden Jr., all while they were in bed. Finally, they traveled to Kenneth's home about 10 minutes away. After completing the murders, they returned home, encased the weapons in concrete, and concealed them in a goose hut in the middle of one of their lakes. While it is difficult to ascertain with certainty, some believe that Angela orchestrated the plan and was involved in every aspect of her son's relationships, exercising control over all their decisions. Angela, Billy George, and Jake were all indicted by a grand jury on counts of aggravated murder and forging child custody documents, among other charges, with each facing a total of 23 charges. All four were held without bail, and all initially pleaded not guilty. The prosecution announced their intention to seek the death penalty for all of them. The community was divided in its reaction. Some were not surprised by the arrests, while others found it difficult to believe that the Wagners could be involved, suggesting there must be a misunderstanding. Jake, Billy, and George had even attended the funerals of the Roden family members, standing among the mourners. Later, the state dropped the murder charges against Billy's mother, Frederica, and the judge ordered the charges be dismissed without prejudice, placing a gag order on the attorneys. Rita Newcomb, Angela's mother, pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of obstructing official business, in exchange for which the felony charges of forgery, perjury, and obstructing justice were dismissed. She stated that as a Christian, she felt remorse for having lied. On the 5th anniversary of the murders, Jake Wagner changed his plea, admitting guilt to 23 charges, including aggravated murder, conspiracy, aggravated burglary, tampering with evidence, and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, referring to his relationship with Hannah when she was 13. During court appearances, Jake often displayed a smirking, laughing demeanor. While expressing remorse, he also claimed he felt he had no choice but to kill Hannah, alleging she was neglectful and reiterating unfounded claims that her boyfriend had molested Sophia. Similar to the baseless accusations he had made against his ex-wife Beth Ann, Jake admitted responsibility for 5 of the 8 killings, stating that he had personally killed Dana, Hannah Roden, Christopher Jr., Frankie, and Hannah Gilley. He claimed that his father Billy had shot Christopher, Sr. Kenneth, and Gary, while George had fired one bullet that missed its target before becoming immobilized with fear, ultimately not killing anyone. Jake agreed to testify against his father, mother, and brother in exchange for the death penalty being removed as a possible sentence for all of them. The prosecution accepted these terms. Following this development, Angela Wagner also changed her plea, admitting guilt to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder. She received a sentence of a minimum of 30 years without the possibility of parole. Jake was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2022, George Wagner's trial began. Given Jake's testimony that George had not fired any lethal shots, George maintained his plea of not guilty, now claiming that he had not even been present at any of the crime scenes and had been asleep by 10:00 p.m. However, the case was not as straightforward as George portrayed it. He had been present during the planning, was there when the murders were committed, and did nothing to prevent them. He had also spent years denying any involvement and lying about his knowledge of the events. The jury heard testimony from numerous witnesses, including Angela Jake, whose testimony was given without cameras present, Tabitha and Beth Ann. Many witnesses had portions of their testimonies redacted from the public record because they expressed fear of the Wagner family and did not want their words to be publicly available. George testified in his own defense, but the jury, after only 8 hours of deliberation, returned guilty verdicts on all counts, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. The trial was one of the longest and most expensive criminal proceedings in Ohio's history. George was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms, plus 121 years with no possibility of parole. Some individuals expressed sympathy toward George, acknowledging that he had not personally killed anyone and that Jake and Angela had essentially sacrificed him to secure lighter sentences for themselves, which seemed surprising given the extraordinary loyalty within the family. There were suggestions that George was easily influenced by his family and may have found himself entangled in a situation before fully comprehending its gravity. Others, however, felt his sentence was justified, arguing that he had conspired and witnessed and covered up the deaths of 8 people. George later indicated his intention to seek a new trial. But as of 2024, no progress has been made in this regard. Billy Wagner continues to maintain his innocence, and his trial, originally scheduled for May 6, 2024, has been postponed until January 2025. At the earliest, as the defense now has an additional 16,000 pages of evidence to review. Wilma McCoy, a relative of the Roden family, expressed concern for her mother Geneva Roden, the matriarch of the Roden family, noting that by the time all the legal proceedings conclude, it will have been nearly a decade since the murders occurred. She worries whether her elderly mother will live to see justice fully served. Brent Lee, Frankie's son, now 11 years old and living with his mother Chelsea, has shared the lasting impact of that night, saying, "I've been scared since that night knowing bad guys came into my house while I was sleeping. I'm always scared now that I will lose my mommy." George's son, Borvin, lives with his mother Tabitha. While the current living arrangements of Ruger and Sophia are not publicly known, though sources indicate they are well, and being properly cared for. This case, with its complex family dynamics, calculated planning, and tragic outcome, stands as one of the darkest and most calculated criminal cases in recent memory. 8 years after the murders, the impact continues to be deeply felt. As Hannah Gilley's mother, Andrea, poignantly observed, "My grandson was made an orphan in one night. I see the pain in Ruger's eyes. He mourns for his dad so bad, and that's something he'll have to do for the rest of his life." These children lost not only their parents, but also their extended family uncles, aunts, and grandparents. Andrea noted that she will forever be answering questions that, by all rights, should never have needed to be asked. The story of the Roden family murders serves as a somber reminder of how disputes and obsessions can escalate to unimaginable tragedy, leaving lasting scars on families and communities for generations to come. Independence, Missouri. A community often described as quiet and safe was home to 63-year-old Louise Dickey. The neighborhood consisted mostly of retired residents and some young families living peacefully in their modest homes along tree-lined streets. Few could have anticipated the events that would unfold in this tranquil setting during the spring of 2016. Louise had previously worked in accounting in Kansas City before a serious car accident altered the course of her life. The injuries she sustained left her unable to walk far or lift more than 5 pounds with each hand. These limitations necessitated regular pain medication to manage her discomfort. Despite these challenges, those who knew Louise consistently described her as cheerful and grateful for the support she received from those around her. Her daughter Miranda lived nearby and would visit weekly to help around the house and check on Louise's beloved cats, Chloe, Monkey, and Reba. The latter was named after Louise's favorite music star, Reba McEntire, reflecting her deep appreciation for music, particularly country. Music brought her considerable joy, and she often spent time listening to records with her best friend Kevin, who later reflected on her character with fondness, saying she was gentle and kind, a real character with a special warmth about her. Louise's family circle was relatively small. Her mother lived in Lee's Summit with Miranda's brother, and she had an uncle in Detroit, but there were few other relatives in her life. She generally kept to herself, living quietly in her home on the 10400 block of East 27th Street. Many neighbors barely knew her, with some not even realizing her house was occupied. One neighbor later remarked, "We thought the home was abandoned because you don't see anybody in there." This quiet existence would be disrupted in the most tragic way. On March 29th, 2016, Miranda received a concerning call from Louise's neighbor Barbara. She wanted to know if Louise had perhaps gone out of town, without mentioning it, as her car was no longer in the driveway. This was highly unusual for Louise, raising immediate concerns. Miranda tried calling her mother, but the call went directly to voicemail, with no answer. Without delay, Miranda drove to her mother's home. Barbara was waiting outside when she arrived. Miranda let herself in, calling out for her mother, but receiving no response. Looking around, she noticed something odd. Her mother's purse was on the sofa with the Ziploc bags Louise typically kept in her purse, empty and scattered beside it. As Miranda walked down the hallway, she noticed the bathroom door was closed. This struck her as peculiar, as Miranda later stated she had never known that bathroom door to be shut. When she slowly opened it, she discovered a devastating scene. Her mother's body was in the bathtub. She had suffered 98 stab wounds and her throat had been cut. Miranda immediately called 911, setting in motion the investigation that would follow. Emergency services arrived promptly at the scene with Detective Bryce Min leading the murder investigation. The violence of the crime was evident from the blood throughout the bathroom. Officers noted both the empty purse and missing cell phone. They requested information on Louise's bank cards and initiated a trace on her phone. They also issued a BOLO, be on the lookout, for Louise's missing vehicle, a golden 1998 Buick Park Avenue. Miranda was taken to the police station for an interview. She recounted her last interaction with her mother, which had taken place the previous evening. Around 5:30, she Facebook messaged me and said, "I can't find my phone. Can you call it?" Which is creatively frequent things. So I called her phone and she picked it up and said, "Okay, found it. Thanks." And I said, "Okay, love you more." And she said, "Love you more." These would be the last words they exchanged. The crime shocked the community that had long considered itself safe. Seeing police vehicles, forensics officers, and journalists in the area was an unusual sight for residents. One local described the neighborhood as a quaint and charming little mom and pop neighborhood. There are a lot of retired people that live around here and a few young families. The violent nature of the crime seemed entirely at odds with the peaceful surroundings. Less than an hour after the BOLO was issued, Officer Jason Harris, who was on patrol, located Louise's vehicle. It was parked in a convenience store parking lot on Truman Road. The store owner informed them that the car had been there since the previous night. When Detective Min arrived at the location, he noticed something potentially valuable: a security camera pointing in the direction of the car. After requesting to view the footage, they observed a young male driving Louise's car into the parking spot and walking toward the store. Additional camera angles confirmed he had been alone in the vehicle. The investigators reviewed footage from inside the store, noting that despite the violent nature of the crime, the man showed no visible traces of blood on his hands or clothes. The video showed him shaking hands with someone in the store, suggesting they knew each other. He then used a phone to attempt to call someone before approaching an ATM. He took out a card and tried to withdraw money, but the transaction failed. After briefly returning to the car, the man went back into the store to speak with an employee. Unfortunately, when officers later showed this employee the footage, he couldn't remember the interaction or identify the man, which was disappointing for the investigation. Further surveillance footage captured the man exiting Louise's vehicle at 6:26 p.m. and approaching a dark Ford Focus. He waved toward the vehicle, which stopped, and he got in on the passenger side before the car drove away. Though the footage wasn't very clear and the license plate couldn't be made out, the officers noted distinctive details about the Ford Focus. It had a missing hubcap on the driver's side, and as it pulled onto the road, they observed that the passenger side was also missing a hubcap. They needed to find this car and its driver, so another BOLO was issued. Meanwhile, investigators had obtained Louise's bank records, which showed her card had been used at a Walgreens store at 5:11 p.m., the day before, approximately 23 minutes before her last communication with Miranda. Officers went to review that store's surveillance footage and discovered Louise had been accompanied by the same mystery man who was later seen abandoning her car at the convenience store. The footage from Walgreens showed Louise and the man purchasing several items before leaving together. This was not long before the police believed she had been murdered. After leaving Walgreens together, Louise and this man were believed to have returned to her home where the murder occurred at 2:02 a.m. On the day Louise's body was discovered, her bank card was used again at a Quick Trip in Kansas City. Someone attempted to withdraw $300, which failed, followed by an attempt to withdraw $100. 1 minute later, surveillance footage from this location provided clearer images of the same blonde man trying to access Louise's account. As he left the store, he got into a car parked outside with its headlights on, suggesting someone was waiting for him. It appeared to be the same dark Ford Focus with the missing driver's side hubcap that had picked him up from the convenience store. Investigators decided to show the footage to others in Louise's life to see if anyone could identify this man. When they showed the footage to Louise's neighbor Barbara, she made a crucial identification. The man was her nephew, Corey King, 26 years old, from Kansas City. Barbara was quickly taken in for a formal interview. When asked how Corey became involved with drugs, Barbara responded, "I don't know, he was shooting up something at one time." Approximately 15 hours after requesting a trace on Louise's phone, it registered at the Ameristar Casino, about 10 miles outside of Independence. Officers immediately went there, but found no sign of Corey or the Ford Focus. They asked the casino for surveillance footage from the previous few hours at 3:20 a.m. Corey was captured on camera talking to someone just out of frame. As he walked over to an ATM, a woman followed him. The police theorized this was the person who had been driving him in the Ford Focus. Corey tried using Louise's card again, but was unsuccessful. At 4:08 a.m. footage showed Corey walking out of the casino with the woman. The Ford Focus was seen driving away, initially signaling to turn right out of the casino premises. But after pausing at the end of the road, it turned left instead. Concerned that Corey might flee the state, and aware of the danger he posed, authorities issued a crime bulletin to all police agencies in the area. Phone records revealed that the calls made from Louise's phone at the convenience store had all been to the same number. Finally, another trace on the phone led officers to a motel where the Ford Focus was parked under surveillance. Corey and the woman were taken into custody. Initially, during questioning, Corey denied involvement in Louise's murder. However, 24 hours after her body was discovered, he confessed. He admitted that while under the influence of drugs, an argument had broken out when Louise wouldn't allow him to sleep on her sofa. He told investigators that he had explained to her that he couldn't leave due to the effects of the drugs in his system, but she still wouldn't let him stay. Corey stated that he grabbed a box cutter from the house, approached Louise from behind, and cut her throat. When she grabbed her neck, he cut her again. He then dragged her body to the bathroom and placed her in the tub before continuing to stab her with another knife. When asked why he did this, he stated that he felt she didn't trust him. During his confession, when asked if Louise had become upset with him, Corey's response was fragmented. "All I remember is the bathtub I blacked out." The interviewer pressed him. "You may have been high on drugs, but I'm going to tell you, you got us to the bathtub, and you know exactly where she was killed. You killed her. She was in the bathtub. Am I correct in saying that, yes or no?" Corey responded, "Yes." Corey admitted to stealing $10, Louise's phone, her debit card, prescription medication from her purse, and the key to her car. He was subsequently charged with armed criminal action and first-degree murder, with prosecutors requesting a $500,000 cash bond. The woman from the Ford Focus was released without charge, as there was no evidence linking her to Louise's murder. For Louise's loved ones, Corey's actions were devastating. Miranda expressed her feelings, I don't think I could ever forgive him. I'm a Christian, but I could not forgive him for what he did. Sabra Armstrong, Louise's longtime high school friend, who had spoken with her the day before the murder, shared her response, very angry. And I know they caught the guy, and I hope he gets the death penalty. Those who knew Louise remembered her warmly. She was so generous, so helpful. If I needed something, she said, "Well, let's go get it," recalled one person. Another shared, she loved cats. She had 3 of them. She'd call herself a cat lady all the time. Miranda described her mother as open and generous, the kind of person who would never hurt anybody. Local news coverage followed the case closely. Police are saying that Corey King was at Louise Dickey's house here on Monday evening, reported Tom Dempsey from 41 Action News. After going to a gas station and Dollar General together, police say King murdered Dickey in the bathroom of this home. The reporter noted that according to police, King had a history of substance abuse and claimed to have been high on marijuana and Xanax during the murder. Corey King eventually entered a guilty plea to armed criminal action and first-degree murder. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder, along with a concurrent life sentence for armed criminal action. He remains incarcerated at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri. Louise Dickey was remembered as a kind, caring woman devoted to her family and grateful for those who supported her. Her life, though ended tragically, had been marked by gentleness and generosity toward others. The quiet neighborhood in Independence eventually returned to its peaceful routine, but for those who knew Louise, the memory of her kindness and the circumstances of her passing would remain.
In the quiet town of Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, on the last day of May 2007, a series of events began to unfold that would deeply affect a family and community. This is what happened when 32-year-old Kate Beagley disappeared. Kate lived in a peaceful area of Surrey, where she had built a successful life. She worked as a national compliance manager for Centrica, a FTSE 100 company, where her strong work ethic had earned her respect and admiration. Those who knew her described Kate as loyal and dependable, someone with a warm smile who could always be counted on in difficult times. On that Thursday, the 31st of May, concerns began to arise when Kate didn't arrive at work. This was unusual for her, as she was known for her reliability and dedication. Her father, knowing she had gone out the evening before, decided to visit her home to check on her well-being. When he arrived, he found the house empty, with no sign of Kate. What made the situation more concerning was that Kate had also missed a scheduled appointment. For those who knew her, this absence was completely out of character. Kate was organized and considerate. She would always inform people if her plans changed. Her father, with growing worry, contacted the police to report her missing. The backdrop to this disappearance was particularly unsettling for the local community. 5 years earlier, in 2002, another disappearance had occurred in the same town, that of 13-year-old Millie Dowler, whose case had remained unsolved at this time. As news of Kate's disappearance spread, her friends mobilized to help. They began organizing search parties and created missing person posters, placing them throughout the area in hopes that someone might have information. Although social media was still in its early days, they established a Facebook group to share updates and gather any possible leads. The police began their investigation promptly, understanding the critical nature of the first hours in a missing person case. They spoke with Kate's friends to build a picture of her last known movements and to identify anyone she might have been with before her disappearance. Through these conversations, something troubling emerged. Kate's friends had been receiving text messages from her phone, but the messages didn't sound like her. Each person has their own pattern of writing, unique phrases, punctuation styles, and word choices that become familiar to those close to them. These messages contained expressions Kate wouldn't normally use, raising further concerns about her whereabouts. When officers searched Kate's home, they discovered a second mobile phone. The missing persons unit examined this phone and found communications that led them to a man Kate had met the night before she disappeared. Her friends knew little about him, only that his name was Carl, and they had met at a club in central London a few weeks earlier. As evening settled over Surrey, the search for Kate continued. Her family waited anxiously for news, hoping for her safe return, while investigators began to piece together the events of the previous evening. The following days brought a gradual unfolding of information as investigators worked to understand what had happened to Kate Beagley. The man identified from Kate's phone was Carl Taylor, a 27-year-old who lived in a one-bedroom flat in Covent Garden, London. When contacted by police, Carl initially answered their call. He explained that he had met Kate for a date, but claimed she had dropped him off in Twickenham before continuing on her way. According to his account, he had gotten onto a bus to return home and hadn't seen her since. The officers noted this information, but certain elements didn't align with other evidence they were gathering. Carl Taylor worked as a fitness instructor and football coach. He was physically fit and had training in martial arts. His background check revealed previous convictions for obtaining property by deception in 2002, though nothing that immediately suggested violent tendencies. As the investigation progressed, officers learned from Carl's mother that he had arrived at her home in the early hours of May 31st, the day Kate was reported missing, driving a Volkswagen Golf she didn't recognize. When she asked about the vehicle, he told her he had gotten it from a woman who needed it cleaned before taking her children to school. This detail was significant, as the car matched the description of Kate's Volkswagen Golf. If Carl's story about being dropped off in Twickenham was accurate, why would he have possession of her vehicle? Further inconsistencies emerged. Carl had given his mother shopping vouchers that morning, which investigators later determined had come from Kate's glove compartment. He had also sold what turned out to be Kate's phone to a friend and had been seen bragging about his new car. Police records showed that Kate's car had been spotted just before midnight on May 30th on Chiswick Bridge, traveling in the opposite direction from Kate's home. A police officer had noted the erratic driving and logged a check with the police national computer. When investigators tried to contact Carl again to clarify these details, he became difficult to reach. Calls from police numbers went unanswered. The officers then tried calling from a personal phone, and Carl answered. During this conversation, he maintained his original story, but was vague with details. The officers informed him that they would need to meet in person to take a formal statement. Carl suggested they meet him at a party he planned to attend that evening in Holland Park. Though an unusual request given the circumstances, the officers agreed, hoping a face-to-face conversation might yield more information. At the party, they spoke with Carl in a separate room. Even in person, he remained evasive, his answers lacking clarity. As more guests arrived and alcohol began flowing, Carl's demeanor changed. He became visibly irritated, and the officers grew concerned about their safety. They decided to take him into custody for questioning at Walton-on-Thames. Concerned about potential volatility, they requested backup from the Metropolitan Police. While waiting for additional officers to arrive, The detective sergeant created a reason to escort Carl downstairs to their car. Once outside, Carl entered the vehicle without resistance. He was then formally arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Kate Beagley and transported to Walton, where the major crime team took over the case under Detective Chief Inspector Mark Preston. As the investigation moved forward, the search for Kate continued, with hope fading but determination remaining to discover what had happened to her. The questioning of Carl Taylor continued at the police station, but his responses changed. When formally interviewed about Kate's disappearance, he refused to provide any information, responding with no comment to every question. The police obtained a court order to extend his detention, giving them more time to gather evidence and continue their questioning. Still, Carl remained silent, offering no explanation for why he had Kate's car or why CCTV footage showed him at a gas station, putting just 1 pound's worth of fuel in her vehicle. The evidence was building a concerning picture, though largely circumstantial. Investigators needed more concrete information, and they needed Carl to talk. After returning him to his cell to reflect on the evidence presented, he was allowed a phone call with his mother. Following this call, the police conducted another interview. Detective Chief Inspector Preston, who had been awake for more than 24 hours at this point, had gone home to rest. Shortly after leaving, he received a phone call from the station with unexpected news. Carl Taylor had confessed. Not only had Carl admitted to killing Kate, but he had also agreed to take officers to where he had left her body. His account was delivered in a detached manner. He claimed he had wanted her car and had attacked her to get it. When she resisted, according to his statement, he stabbed her repeatedly. "She pushed me away," he told police. "She was grabbing me and I stabbed her in the throat. I constantly and consistently cut her in the neck because she was going for my face." The officers found this explanation difficult to believe. Given Carl's physical strength and martial arts training, the need to use a weapon against someone he could have easily overpowered seemed questionable. Nevertheless, they arranged for him to guide them to the location where he said he had taken Kate's body, near Watford in Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire police were contacted to assist with the operation. Every precaution was taken to ensure Carl was recorded throughout the journey and that evidence was properly preserved. In the darkness of night, Carl directed the officers to a local nature reserve called Oxhay Woods. The area was quiet and dark as Carl pointed them toward an area of stinging nettles. An officer carefully approached the location from behind, avoiding any path the perpetrator might have taken. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, their search concluded with a tragic discovery. Kate's body was found, bringing an end to the missing persons investigation. The area was immediately secured, and crime scene examiners began the methodical process of collecting evidence. The news devastated Kate's family. In a statement released on their behalf, her parents, Alan and Claire, and her brother Guy, expressed their profound loss. Kate was a loving, thoughtful, dependable, loyal, and tremendously popular daughter, sister, granddaughter, godmother, and friend who was devoted to her family and friends. Kate will be missed by everyone that knew her every day and in every way. People left flowers at the scene, many of them deeply affected by Kate's story. One message read, "I never met you, but I feel like I have known you for a lifetime. My heart goes out to all those who are blessed with your love and friendship. The place is a sorrier place without you." Due to the extent of her injuries and the warm weather that had accelerated decomposition, formal identification required DNA testing. The post-mortem examination would later reveal that Kate had suffered more than 30 stab wounds to her neck, face, and head. Carl told investigators that he had thrown the murder weapon from her car as he drove down the motorway after leaving her body. Despite this challenge, officers conducted extensive searches and remarkably managed to recover both the knife and some of Kate's clothing along the route. The car was found where Carl had said it would be, on an estate in Harlesden, London. Bottles of water that Kate kept in her vehicle had been used to wash her body, and forensic testing confirmed the presence of her blood on the knife. As the investigation continued, the details of what had happened on the night of May 30th began to emerge more clearly. Carl Taylor agreed to show investigators the location where he and Kate had spent time together on the evening of May 30th. He took them to a pub in Richmond Hill where they had met for their date. Across from the pub was an embankment overlooking the Thames River, with several benches positioned along the path. Carl identified one of these benches as the place where he had attacked Kate. Consistent with his account, blood was found on the ground, steps, and handrails leading back toward the pub. Testing confirmed the blood belonged to Kate. With the evidence now sufficient, Carl Taylor was formally charged with the murder of Kate Beagley. Despite his earlier confession and the substantial evidence against him, he entered a plea of not guilty when the case went to trial. His defense strategy had shifted. He now claimed he had acted in self-defense and, more implausibly, suggested that Kate had taken her own life. The prosecution presented a different narrative of events, based on witness testimony and forensic evidence. The court heard that Carl and Kate had met on May 18th at the CC Club in Piccadilly, central London. They had arranged to meet again for a date at the pub in Richmond Hill approximately 2 weeks later. During their date, witnesses observed that Kate appeared distracted and unengaged. One witness told police, "As soon as they sat down, the girl had her head down, texting on her mobile phone. There was no conversation, only him talking to her. She was still texting when they left." From the pub, they had walked to the bench on the embankment. The prosecution contended that Carl had come prepared, with a pair of scissors and a carving knife concealed up his sleeve. When Carl testified in his own defense, he described Kate as kind and nice, but claimed she had been struggling emotionally and intended to end her life. He stated that he had tried to prevent her from harming herself, but her injuries were too severe. To challenge this account, the prosecution rolled up a piece of paper to represent a knife and asked Carl to demonstrate for the court how Kate could have inflicted more than 30 wounds to her own face, head, and neck. He refused. The judge, Giles Forrester, instructed him to comply, reminding him that he was not in control of the proceedings. Carl's eventual attempt to demonstrate the self-infliction scenario was described by observers as unrealistic and unconvincing. In his testimony, Carl claimed, "She was prodding herself in the neck area and at the same time was pulling her hair so her head was moving around. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there in awe. I realized she passed away. I was crying profusely. I lay on the grass and looked at the sky." According to his account, he then moved her body to her car. CCTV footage had captured him at a petrol station, purchasing just £1 worth of fuel. Kate's body was in the trunk of the vehicle at this time. During the trial, it emerged that Carl had written a letter to Kate's family from his cell at Staines Police Station. In this letter, he referred to Kate as an angel and wrote about her spirit living on, while acknowledging that what he had done was wrong. The detectives who intercepted this letter decided not to share it with Kate's family. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Carl Taylor was found guilty of murder. The public gallery responded with visible relief as the verdict was announced. The judge sentenced Carl to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years to serve before being eligible for parole consideration. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Forrester addressed Carl directly. I am satisfied that this was a murder done for gain. You went to meet this girl equipped with a knife. She was doing no more than looking to you for friendship. You took advantage of the vulnerability of that girl for your own ends. Carl attempted to interrupt, saying, I didn't, Your Honor. But the judge continued, Your use of the knife was premeditated and it was concealed on your person. Then, having carried out this foul deed, you took her away and callously concealed the body. The judge described Carl as arrogant, manipulative, and highly dangerous, emphasizing the premeditated nature of his actions. Today, flowers mark the spot close to where Kate's life ended. One message reads, We miss you, Kate, and wish you were still this side of the rainbow. Following the conviction, Kate's father spoke outside the courthouse. I speak for us all when I say our lives will never be the same again. Our family has been devastated, and life seems empty and meaningless without Kate. 7 detectives from Surrey Police and the Metropolitan Police were commended for their exceptional work on the case. Deputy Chief Constable Craig Denholm noted, This challenging inquiry involved 3 force areas and multiple scenes. To secure a conviction whereby the offender received life imprisonment with a minimum tariff to serve of 30 years was a testament to the officers' excellent teamwork. The loss of Kate Beagley left an enduring impact on her family and community. Her father, Alan, later expressed the profound emptiness he continued to feel after her death. I still feel empty and cold, and I will never lose that feeling. Kate was so vibrant and full of life. For Kate's family, the conclusion of the legal process brought some measure of closure, but as her father observed, they face a lifetime of coming to terms with her absence. Kate is remembered for her kindness, loyalty, and the joy she brought to those who knew her. As time passes, the community continues to honor her memory, finding ways to preserve the spirit of a woman who touched so many lives during her time.